Great to see everybody tonight. Thanks for sharing in our Bible study tonight. We're switching gears tonight. We've been studying over the past several weeks about what we simply entitled worship scenes. We went through the Old Testament for a while and talked about various worship scenes. We moved into the New Testament for a while. We concluded that study by looking at some things that happen in the heavenly realm out of a couple of texts in the book of Revelation. So we wrapped that up. For those who've been involved in that study, we wrapped that up on Sunday morning and have been announcing that we're moving into the book of Ecclesiastes. That's our plan as we start tonight to kind of begin this discussion. We'll introduce the book a little bit tonight, get into chapter 1 in our discussion this evening as well. And then I'm going to treat this a little bit. I did put some review questions out. I'll look at those kind of when we're done with each chapter. We'll use those questions to kind of go back. But if you'll use them, it will help you get an idea of where the chapter is leading you. And so the questions are good for you to be able to just work through the text itself. And then we'll ultimately, though, use those at the end of each chapter just to kind of review it before we move on. That'll be the plan. I don't anticipate getting through all of chapter 1 tonight, and so you probably won't be reviewing those maybe till Sunday, and it may be next Wednesday for all I know. But anyway, great to see everybody tonight. Before we get into our study, if you would, let's bow our heads together. Let's share in a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the great blessings of life that you give to us, the strength and encouragement provided to us on a daily basis. We know and are mindful of many who are challenged, facing various difficulties of health and various challenges that even keep them from us tonight. We just pray for them, strengthen them, and encourage them. We know there are those who would desire to want to come and to assemble and be with us, but just physically can't make that happen right now. Be with them and encourage them even this hour. Thank you for loving us and caring for us. Be with us in this new study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Let us gain the wisdom that is provided for us in the book. Help us to use that wisdom and make application of those lessons and just appreciate your testimony even more throughout our study. Guide us in every righteous endeavor, and we pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. So when thinking about the book of Ecclesiastes, and I'll ask you a trick question. It's not really a trick question, but it's a bit of a trick question. So who wrote the book? Do we know anything about who wrote the book? Okay, we generally argue that Solomon, or believe that Solomon wrote the book. By strict definition, who wrote the book? Well, I want you to think about that. And it's up there on the screen, by the way. So here's what we do know. I'm going to walk up here. I can't do that. I'll walk off camera. The words of the preacher, weird word, by the way. The word it's derived from, that's this, if my understanding's right, the book of Ecclesiastes is the only place you find it. It's by definition not so much preacher as we generally think, but it's more debater. It's the idea of somebody who's going to kind of place two arguments beside each other and then tell you which one of those two is the wiser path to take. And that happens throughout the entirety of the book. And so what we know about the author is, from verse 1, is that he defines himself as the preacher, and he is the son of David. Now, that might lend itself a little bit towards Solomon, but the problem with that is, did David have more than one son? Yeah, he had many, right? He had more than one. So the preacher doesn't necessarily help us exactly. The son of David narrows it, but doesn't just come out and say Solomon. But what's the third piece? King in Jerusalem. Okay, that helps it a little more, right? Because whoever this is defined as the son of David, but he's qualified one step further by saying he was king in Jerusalem. So is Solomon the only one that would fit that description? Maybe, right? Maybe, because Solomon is the son of choice of David, who ends up on the throne as prophesied. But ultimately, Solomon's going to have replacements, right? They would be hit, but sometimes language points back to the patriarch, and it would call somebody the son of David, even though they might be 2 or 3 generations later. The Bible's tricky that way sometimes with names, because it would consider anybody within reasonable direct lineage of David could easily consider them as a son. So by strictly just looking at the defining phrase in the beginning of the book, it leads us to Solomon. It doesn't necessarily get us there with 100% certainty, right?
Like Hebrews.
Yeah, Hebrews might point to Paul pretty heavily, but you can't necessarily pinpoint it exactly. Okay, so verse 1 helps. It gets us to this guy who's a debater, right? He's able to put arguments together and set them side by side and illustrate which one should come to the top. He is a son of David, right? So he's part of royalty. He's part of the king's heritage, and so that helps us frame a little bit more. And he has served as king, or is king, in Jerusalem. The little bit of trick, there's some that point and actually would argue that this can't be Solomon, by the way. And one of the verses they point to, if I'm going to scroll down to it ahead of time here, and it's verse 12 of the first chapter. Because in verse 12, depending on your translation, but he says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And some argue, well, Solomon, once he was king, he never stopped being the king. So Solomon can't speak of himself as a past tense king. But the word was doesn't always mean I once was and now I am not. Sometimes the phrase I was simply defines the position that the man was in when he said and wrote these things, right? While I was king over Israel, I said these things. Now, here's what helps us frame it a little bit as well. That's an interesting phrase, right? I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So if you're king over Israel in Jerusalem, what time period you got to be under? Yeah, you got to be under the United Kingdom, right? Because Israel changes in the divided kingdom period. When the divided kingdom comes, Israel is those 10 northern tribes and has different seat of government. And Judah and Benjamin remain to the south, and they rule out of Jerusalem. So how many in the undivided, the united kingdom of that time, how many of those kings do we have? 3. We only have 3. We've got the first one, which was Saul. We have the second, which is David, and the third, Solomon. All right, so we've got preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem over Israel, which would, by general understanding, have to put it in the United Kingdom portion. So my point is, you might not have a phrase, a statement in any of the chapters in the book of Ecclesiastes that says, I, Solomon, say this. But in the courts that we have today, we'd say by the preponderance, right, of the evidence. When you mount all the evidence together, you begin to understand a pattern that illustrates that you're really narrowing down who this could be, maybe even to the point that there is but one guy that fits the entirety of the description. Go ahead, Sue.
One of the things that lead me to believe it's Solomon is as you go through the study of Ecclesiastes, there's a lot being talked about riches and how it's all vanity. Well, there was no one any richer than Solomon. And the Old Testament bears that out in various places.
Right.
So, to me, when you figure you got a king over Israel in Jerusalem, and you add the lifestyle that Solomon had with all the riches that he had, that's pretty hard to argue against it. That's not Solomon.
And that argument's built good.
That leads me to believe that this could be Solomon, possibly is the next verse, where it says, and I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. One of the big things you see about Solomon is he's looking for wisdom. He was given the choice of, by God, I'll give you this, this, this. He picks, no, I want wisdom.
Yeah. So he seems to fit that description is what I see here. Okay.
Next verse.
Yeah. So we're building. Let me share one other thing with you, just to help you a little bit here. I'm going to show you a little bit of a timeline on the screen here, if I can do this. Blow it up large enough. It'll be maybe a little bit hard for you to see, but I'll try to blow it up. So, and I'm not really necessarily going to talk about that first part of that chart. You get a rough idea of when Solomon comes into power. He's after David, right? He's ruling well. But the problem is Solomon builds a lot of stuff, including a lot of homes for himself, a lot of high places for his wives to worship their gods, and the temple itself. And that takes a lot of what? Time and money. It takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of manpower, right? So you've got to have, you're not, AI isn't designing the temple, right? David gives him these elaborate, detailed plans, and he's got to get the manpower put together to do that. So how did he manage to do that? Two things: forced labor and taxes. Solomon builds the empire that he had that even the Queen of the South said, I ain't never seen anything like this. I heard a lot of stories about this man. The half hasn't even been told when I laid my own eyes on it, right? But that happened on the backs of the people. And late in his reign, and by the way, evidence of if you want to read 1 Kings 4, 1 Kings 5, you see that labor, that work, that taxation situation. But late in his reign, you start reading in about chapter 11 of 1 Kings, you begin to see in his later years, problems begin to build, and he begins to recognize it. It starts with the fact that he had married and loved a lot of, by what they're defining, strange foreign, right? That's not part of the heritage of God. With the daughter of Pharaoh, with the Moabites, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not trying to speak overly disparagingly here, but women and so many that you don't even name them, you just say where they came from, right? Women of the Moabites, women of the Ammonites, women of the Edomites, women of the Zidonians, the Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. It's interesting, right? God's warning about marrying outside of God's heritage wasn't about the fact that you couldn't fall in love with one of those women. It wasn't about the fact that they just happened to be from another nation. It was about God's understanding that the minute it happens, they'll persuade you away from Him, and you'll start worshiping the idols that they bring with them. And by the way, Solomon is a perfect example. It's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. I
mean, wasn't that to keep the lineage of Christ pure?
Well, in this moment, I'm just telling you what it was in this moment, was what's recorded there, that God's concern was the idolatry that was rampant. Yes, there was also an element that he needed to get to Jesus through the promise. And but at the end of the day, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. So Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and all these others, and did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord. He built the high places that they began to go and worship at, and his wives kept leading there. What's your point, Brian? My point is that you see Solomon here. Here's a man who recognizes vanity of vanities, all is vanity. When he reaches the end of his life, he's lost just about everything he ever really had of value. He's lost his commitment to God. He's lost his understanding of what he should be focused on. He's left the wealth and the imagery that they had of him draw such a pouring out of people wanting to be associated with him, 1,000 women within his harem, for lack of a better description. And it finally, in his older age, you could just see it. You could see it crumbling. In fact, it's interesting to know, and go back to this chart for just a second. So when that process starts bearing out, before Solomon dies, Jeroboam gets told by a prophet that he took 12, and he said, take 10 of those. Take 10 of those. You're going to be a king. Before they actually, Solomon's still breathing. And the prophecies are already laid out about the division of the kingdom that's coming. And Solomon's, you're right, you're at the end of your days, and you're seeing, though he wasn't there when it officially occurs between Jeroboam and Rehoboam, but he's witnessing the crumbling of the nation. I'm just trying to get you to see more preponderance of the evidence that Ecclesiastes is this message from what appears to be Solomon, who's looking back at all of this, and some of the final things he pens is how he squandered away what really was valuable. And you'll see that throughout the book in the various ways that he illustrates that. Just more evidence that it's...
Solomon and his biblical writing, he wrote some of the Proverbs and Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastes, if he wrote. But he wrote that at the end of his life, last thing he wrote, and he looks back on his life. The things he did, the things he shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting, Bill. This would in some ways contradict a little bit of what I taught about the Song of Solomon not that long ago in sermon form, but it's worthy of a thought. If you recall, I took the idea that Song of Solomon had three characters That there was the king who's pursuing the maiden, there's the maiden, and there's the shepherd boy who's her beloved. And we talked about how that would fit within that description in that sermon. If you view the Song of Solomon as more two characters, the king and this young maiden, some argue that's young Solomon. So young Solomon is writing Song of Solomon as a young man who's in pursuit of this young maiden that he'd like to marry. That's young Solomon writing this love story as it relates to that. Middle-aged Solomon writes the Proverbs and shares the wisdom of the Proverbs. Song of Solomon in his last days looks back at it all, or Solomon in his last days looks back at it all and writes Ecclesiastes. It fits. It fits. It fits. Go ahead, Bob.
The book of Ecclesiastes has been referred to as a sermon. So if Solomon wrote it, and this laid out like a sermon, then that would fit him. And I read one conjecture on this verse 12 that Solomon wrote the Ecclesiastes, but it wasn't. It was published in past tense after he was out, and consequently it was used as present, past tense in the verse.
Right. And I think it obviously, if we're accurate in when that it's Solomon and when he wrote it was late, and it sure seems that whoever's writing this seems to have spent a lifetime of experiences and is looking back on it, whomever it is. And if it be Solomon, it would have had to have been published and shared posthumously if it comes late in his life. Go ahead, Brian.
So I have to remember when, I always had to remind myself that Solomon, up to this point, had more wisdom than anyone else in history. Except you can bait Adam, he's pre-programmed.
Right.
And one of the reasons, and we can go on and on about, the date of the authorship, Solomon had worldly wisdom. And I always say, how the Tower of Babel was the origin of all cults, all false religion. The book of Ecclesiastes, from what I've studied, is the source of all human philosophy, false philosophy. The Bible warns us about that.
Yeah.
Constructivism, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that date is pushed to 300 to 500 BC, from what I've gathered, rather than the 900s, is because, number one, they're trying to get it close to an apocryphal book called Ecclesiastes, which is written by a false guy. It's not real. And so they try to make that fit. Because all those guys, Plato, Aristotle, all these isms, came from him, came from Solomon. I mean, you see things in here, the hydroelectric system, you see things about nature, you see things about anatomy. He knew all of it. But it didn't do him any good in the end.
Yeah. And you're right. And let's use that to segue, because that's the core of the book is when you see the word wisdom, and I think it's important to get this out as we're starting. When we see the word wisdom, we think of something that is good, right? Wisdom is good. In the book of Ecclesiastes, generally speaking, wisdom is not good. What he learned took him further away from God.
Yeah, Solomon was so wise that he knew some of the things that he did.
Yeah. So just be warned about that. When you read through this book, recognize why does he keep calling wisdom vanity? Well, he's not talking about God's wisdom is why. He's not talking about the wisdom that was pure and holy and that came from the Creator. He's talking about the worldly, earthly wisdom that he had gained. And when he looks back, he realizes that pitted him against God, and it became useless. Yeah. And so I appreciate Brian mentioning that, because it's vital when you're studying this book to catch that, because he's just going to keep saying it over and over again. And he's going to illustrate the various things that he experienced and what he saw and how he experienced those things. And he's going to remind us over and over again what human wisdom can do to you if you're not careful. And if you don't put it in its proper spot and recognize where its value is and where its value isn't, and how it can create conflict between the wisdom that God provides and the wisdom that men pursue. And so you'll see it when we read throughout that. It's interesting. Jeroboam's already been told he's going to get the 10 pieces. But Rehoboam's given warning. Listen, right? What can I do to save the nation? Cut their taxes. Sounds strange, right? Because it sounds like a political ploy that you hear about in modern times. But that's exactly what they told him. They said, if you keep taxing the people like your father did, the nation's going to crumble, because the people are going to revolt. They're tired of it. But if you pull back on that a little bit and you give them some rest from that, they'll follow you forever. He made it worse. He made it worse, which played right into the prophecy concerning Jeroboam, and the next thing you know, you got a divided kingdom. And so all of the pieces, I only did that exercise with you because I just wanted you to see that. All of the pieces, when you start putting them all together, overwhelmingly point to Solomon. And it helps appreciate then the messaging maybe a little more when we recognize that body of evidence that points right to this wise man who just got it too late.
Scripture does this a lot. There might be a message in there that they might say this word or this person, but from the context and from other scriptures, compared like the timeline,
You can see it.
Yeah,
you can see it. Yep. So notice verse 2. Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go into them. He's starting right where his problem started. Right? We were told not to do that. Neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. We saw that in 1 Kings. Now I'll go back to verse 2 of chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes. What do he call it here? Vanity of vanities. Emptiness of emptiness. Uselessness of uselessness. However you want to say it. Says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. He says it again. All is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. So let me pause for a minute. What you're going to see in the next 7 or 8 verses, he's going to make 4 comparisons that he's going to illustrate the point he's trying to make of vanity of vanities. And he's going to just lay some things side by side, things that people should understand. And he's going to say, look at what resulted what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth what? Abideth forever. Every generation thinks they're smarter than the one before it. And Solomon says, no, you're not. No, you're not. Yeah. Generations come and generations go. And the only thing that has been remaining is the world in which God has created to begin with. generations come, they go, they come, they go, they come, they go. They've been doing that since the days of Adam and Eve. And Solomon says, the writer says, generations pass away. That's what they do. There's not longevity. There's not this permanency. Even you can get as wise as you can become in earthly things, and that generation's still what? It's still going to pass. You think about the advancements. I thought about this a little bit. But my grandmother, Hazel, was born in 1900. So I'm trying to remember when her birthday was, but she'd be 125 this year. That's amazing when you think about it. But she's born in literally the year 1900. And I thought, wow, what? She didn't quite get to 100, but what she witnessed from technological advancement from 1900, if she had made it to 2000, what that would be like. And part of the reason why it always comes to my mind is Isaac, my middle child, was born in 2000. And I've often thought, what would he see in 2100 if that, right? The advancements. And yet still every generation in that span of 100 years is what? Still subject to passing away. You can get technologically advanced. You can find new medicines that can now help fix this problem, only to go, oh no, we've got a what? We got something else now that can take us out. I'm not trying to be flippant. I'm trying to get to illustrate here that no matter how technologically advanced we get, every generation still passes. It's the cyclical functionality of the earth in which God created. And so be careful that we don't become so, first point he makes, first illustration he makes, be careful, don't become so smart that you believe your generation is going to be the one that's different than all the others, because you can become enamored with that mindset, and it's empty.
And come to think that it's like, oh, my generation's better than this one before us and one before that. But it's just like you're trying to say, there's no difference. You will make the same types of mistakes as these people, maybe not in the same exact areas, but you'll still make the same mistakes as people, and then in the end, you're all going to die anyways.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
Yeah. And it's very blunt in some ways, the point he makes, but that's the first illustration that he uses. The second is in verse 5. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hateth to his place where he arose. The generation departed, the earth stayed, and the sun's still doing the same thing it's always done, right? Roughly speaking. It's still rising, still going down, sunrise, sunset. The third, the wind is what? The wind goeth toward the south, then it turneth about to the north, it whirleth around about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. Now that's interesting, isn't it?
Circles.
Yeah. He understood, what would we call that, by the way? We'd call them jet streams, call them trade winds, right? We think we've figured something out. Solomon already understood that there was a pattern to this. He may not have been able to tap into that pattern in the way that we might be able to. I can remember the first time I ever flew in a plane was a nice, gentle flight from Columbus, Ohio to Dallas, Texas. The second time I flew in a plane was a horrible experience from Dallas, Texas to Columbus, Ohio. We get in the plane, and the pilot says, we've got bad news and good news. I'm like, great, give me the bad news first. The bad news is we're in a wind pattern and a storm system that's going to make this flight pretty bumpy and rocky all the way to Columbus. Well, how in the world is there any good news? Well, the good news is the wind's going to push the plane faster than it would normally go. We're going to be in Columbus 15 minutes early. I'd take the calm air over the 15 minutes early any day of the week, right? But we understand we can even use in some ways some of this, but the wisdom's been there. Solomon says, and the circuits of the wind and the patterns in which they come and they go, man thinks he's got everything, it's been. The rivers run into the sea. And yet the sea doesn't what? It doesn't fill up. They rise and they fall, and you can talk about tides and those kinds of things. But if you just took a glass of water that had more water, you got a 12-ounce full of water and an 8-ounce cup, and you start pouring that in there, what's going to happen at ounce 8.01? It's going to come out, right? It's going to overflow. And your mind thinks, all these rivers keep flowing into the sea. Why aren't they why aren't they just flooding it? And Solomon says, well, because God designed this to function, and man keeps thinking he's going to figure all these various details. He already understood it. How rain comes down, rivers full, rivers run to the sea, they don't fill, water evaporates, backs into the sky, back into rain, back into the river, back into the sea, right? There's a pattern.
We just gave it a fancy name.
Yeah. Understood. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wanted, something occurred to me and I thought I'd just throw it out there. When God created the sun to rule the day, the moon to rule the night, created the earth, set it spinning, put it on its course. The moon does not orbit. I mean, it orbits, but it doesn't rotate. The same face of that full moon that you saw last night and you'll see tonight is the same face on that full moon that Adam saw, that Jesus saw, that people, however many generations on, will see. And so when he says the earth remains.
Just because of Brian's point a moment ago, just because we're able to label it or name it doesn't mean that they didn't already understand it and see it and observe it in that time. So again, vanity of vanities. So we keep seeking things that in some ways should just already be generally understood, right? We keep trying to find new ways to look at basic things that haven't changed for generations, and he's warning. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. There's lots of interesting thought there, and the bell just rang, so we'll take 30 seconds, but we'll have to come back to this Sunday. But it's interesting, right? Most of us have these, right? One of these. It's interesting. Have you ever seen a group of people sitting around a table? And they all are doing this. And they have no... They're conversing with somebody on this, but not the person sitting at the table. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Or worse yet, you're out in this great world that God has designed and purposed, and you're viewing it through a 5.8 rectangular screen, right? Because we have to document everything. We can't take a hike in a park. It's got to be documented. And so I got my phone and I'm making sure I'm documenting it. I'm being sarcastic. But that's what's your point, Brian? My point is, that's kind of what he's saying. They rather than just appreciating what God has created, rather than just acknowledging the beauty and the grandeur and the majesty of what God has done, the manner in which He's designed this world to work and function, the winds, the rivers, the seas, the sun, rather than just appreciating it, we're always trying to explain it. And we're trying to define it. And we're trying to there's nothing worse sometimes than seeing the beauty of God and then have somebody try to give me some kind of technological definition of what I just witnessed, right? Sometimes we can get too smart and we're trying to get so wise that we can define everything that we don't actually appreciate what it is that I'm actually looking at. And I see some of that in Solomon's writing here. We get so enamored with trying to say, I understand it. I know what that is, and here's what it is, and here's how it works, and here's how the science behind it functions. And we get so enamored with the earthly wisdom side that we don't get to see the beauty of it and the real benefit that comes from it.
You don't pay any attention to at all. And they're living in the moment.
Yeah.
They're not looking ahead, they're just looking right now.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's great to witness that once in a while. I'll share this real quick with you before I close, just to give you a positive about a younger generation. So, what year was that? 2018, I think, something like that. Anyway, we took the band to Disney. But on the way to Florida, on our way through Florida to get to Disney, we stopped, and this is March, so it's not warm weather time, but we stopped at Cocoa Beach so that the kids could see the ocean. There were kids, the only part of the world they ever saw was whatever the band bus took them to. And they walked off of this bus, fortunately a charter, not a school bus, for all the way to Florida, and they walk out and their minds were blown the first time they ever saw an ocean. And it was great to watch, to just see people just appreciate what they're actually looking at for the first time. And I wish somehow you could bottle that, right? You could bottle that thought in the moment and then remind ourselves that's what it's about. It's not about figuring out how did all these rivers run to this ocean and not fill it up, and no, it was just, wow, there's the ocean. And Solomon seems to talk a little bit of that way in this text. Thanks for giving me a couple extra minutes.